The helicopter blades cut through the frozen air like knives as Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen pressed his face against the small window. Below him stretched endless white wilderness, Siberia in all its brutal glory. The temperature gauge on his wrist read -42 degrees Fahrenheit, and that was inside the heated aircraft. 5 minutes to drop zone, the pilot's voice crackled through the headset. Chen looked across at his team. 4 Navy SEALs, each one hand-picked for this classified mission. There was Rodriguez, the explosives expert whose steady hands had defused bombs in Iraq. Thompson, their communications specialist who could hack into any system. Williams, the medic who had saved more lives than he could count. And finally, their team leader, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, a man whose reputation preceded him in every military circle. The mission briefing had been simple enough. Intelligence suggested that a rogue Russian scientist had stolen classified nuclear research and was hiding in an abandoned Soviet research facility deep in the Siberian wilderness. Their job was to retrieve the data and extract the scientist before enemy forces could reach him first. "Weather's getting worse," the pilot announced, his voice tense. "Storm front moving in faster than expected." Morrison checked his GPS coordinates one more time. The facility was supposed to be 15 clicks northeast of their landing zone. In good weather, it would be a manageable hike. But Siberia didn't believe in good weather. The helicopter shuddered as wind gusts hit it from all sides. Chen could see ice forming on the windows despite the heating system. Outside, snow was falling so thick it looked like a white curtain had been drawn across the world. "This is as close as I can get you," the pilot shouted over the increasing noise of the storm. "I'll be back at the extraction point in 72 hours. Don't be late." The team gathered their gear and prepared to rappel down. Each man carried enough supplies to last a week, including cold weather gear that could keep them alive in temperatures that would kill an ordinary person in minutes. Their weapons were specially modified for Arctic conditions, and their communication equipment was military grade. Morrison was the first to drop, disappearing into the swirling snow below. One by one, the others followed. Chen was the last to go, taking one final look at the warm interior of the helicopter before sliding down the rope into the frozen hell below. The cold hit him like a physical blow, even through all his protective gear. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked him off his feet the moment his boots touched the ground. Snow whipped around them in vicious spirals, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. "Sound off!" Morrison's voice came through their radio system. "Rodriguez here. Thompson present. Williams good to go. Chen ready." But as they tried to orient themselves, it became clear that something was very wrong. The GPS readings were all over the place. The magnetic interference from the storm was playing havoc with their equipment. Worse yet, the landmarks they had studied in satellite photos were nowhere to be seen. "We need to find shelter," Williams shouted over the wind. "This storm is getting worse by the minute." They formed a single file line, with Morrison taking point and Chen bringing up the rear. The snow was already knee-deep and getting deeper with every step. Their boots crunched through the frozen surface, but underneath was powdery snow that threatened to swallow them with each stride. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Rodriguez spotted something through the blizzard. "Building 2 o'clock, he called out. It was a small wooden structure, probably an old hunting cabin or research outpost. The windows were boarded up, and snow had drifted halfway up the walls, but it would provide shelter from the storm. Morrison kicked in the door, weapon ready. The interior was dark and musty, filled with old furniture covered in dust sheets. But it was warm compared to outside, and more importantly, it would protect them from the wind. "We'll wait here until the storm passes," Morrison decided. "Thompson, see if you can get the radio working. We need to report our position." But Thompson's attempts to raise their command base met with nothing but static. The storm was interfering with all electronic communications. They were effectively cut off from the outside world. As the hours passed, the storm only grew worse. The wind howled around the cabin like a living thing, and the temperature continued to drop. Even inside their shelter, their breath formed clouds in the frigid air. "How long do these Siberian storms typically last?" Williams asked, trying to get their portable heater working. "Could be hours, could be days," Chen replied grimly. He had studied the region extensively before the mission. Some of these blizzards can last for a week. That was when the reality of their situation began to sink in. They had supplies for several days, but if the storm continued much longer, they would be in serious trouble. Their extraction point was miles away, and without GPS, finding it in this weather would be nearly impossible. Morrison gathered the team around their small heater. "Listen up. We knew this mission carried risks. The storm is just another obstacle. We'll get through this like we've gotten through everything else." But even as he spoke, they could all hear the doubt in his voice. Outside, the wind continued to rage and the snow kept falling. They were trapped in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, with no way to call for help and no clear way forward. Rodriguez checked their supplies one more time. "Food for 4 days, maybe 5 if we're careful. Water's not a problem with all this snow as long as we can keep melting it." "What about the mission?" Thompson asked. "The facility could be anywhere in this weather." Morrison stared out through a gap in the boarded window at the white chaos beyond. "Right now, our mission is survival. Everything else comes second." As night fell, the temperature inside the cabin dropped even further. They huddled around their small heater, taking turns standing watch, though there was little to watch for except the endless snow. Each man was lost in his own thoughts, wondering if they would live to see another sunrise. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be getting stronger. The wind was so loud now that they had to shout to be heard even inside the cabin. Ice was forming on the interior walls, despite their heater. Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they were in serious trouble. He had been on dangerous missions before, but this was different. In combat, you could fight back. Against nature in Siberia, you could only endure and hope to survive. "We need to make a decision," Williams said during his watch shift. "Do we stay here and hope the storm passes, or do we try to push on toward the facility?" It was the question they were all thinking, but nobody wanted to voice. Staying meant gambling that the storm would end before their supplies ran out. Leaving meant venturing into weather that could kill them in minutes if they became separated or lost. Morrison made the call. "We stay until morning. If the weather doesn't improve, we'll reassess." But as dawn approached, bringing no relief from the storm, they all knew their options were running out. The radio remained dead, their GPS was useless, and outside, Siberia continued its relentless assault. Chen checked his watch. They had been in the cabin for 18 hours. The storm had been raging for nearly 24. At this rate, they would be eating their emergency rations within days. "I never thought I'd say this," Rodriguez muttered, staring at their dwindling fuel supply, "but I'm starting to think we might not make it out of here." It was the first time anyone had voiced what they were all thinking. They were Navy SEALs, trained for the most dangerous missions in the world, but Siberia was proving to be an enemy unlike any they had faced before. The storm continued to rage outside, showing no mercy for the 5 men trapped in the small cabin, slowly running out of time, supplies, and hope. 3 days had passed since the storm began, and their situation had gone from bad to desperate. The small cabin that had seemed like salvation now felt more like a tomb. Their food supplies were running dangerously low, and the portable heater was consuming fuel faster than anyone had calculated. Morrison hadn't slept properly in 48 hours. As team leader, he felt the weight of every decision pressing down on him like the snow accumulating outside their shelter. The radio remained dead, producing nothing but static whenever Thompson tried to establish contact with their base. "We can't wait any longer," Morrison announced during their morning briefing. The team was gathered around the dying embers of their heater, their breath visible in small clouds. If we don't move today, we won't have the strength to move at all. Chen nodded grimly. He had been monitoring their physical condition, and the signs weren't good. Despite their training and conditioning, the extreme cold was taking its toll. Their reflexes were slower, their thinking less sharp. Hypothermia was becoming a real threat. "What about the storm?" Williams asked. Through the gaps in the boarded windows, they could still see snow falling, though the wind seemed slightly less violent than it had been. "It's our only chance," Morrison replied. "We push toward the facility. If we can't find it, we head for the extraction point. Either way, staying here means dying here." They spent an hour preparing for departure, checking and rechecking their gear. Their weapons had been kept warm to prevent jamming, and their cold weather clothing was layered for maximum protection. Each man carried emergency rations and water purification tablets. Rodriguez volunteered to take point, using his experience as a tracker to navigate through the trackless wilderness. Behind him, Thompson carried their communication equipment, still hoping to establish contact with the outside world. The moment they stepped outside, the cold hit them like a physical assault. Even through their protective gear, Chen could feel the moisture in his nose beginning to freeze. The snow was waist-deep in places, forcing them to break trail one step at a time. Morrison checked their compass bearing, though he wasn't entirely sure how accurate it would be with all the magnetic interference in the area. They were heading northeast, toward where the facility was supposed to be located, but in the whiteout conditions, every direction looked the same. After 2 hours of brutal hiking, they stopped to rest and check their position. Rodriguez was breathing heavily, his face red from exertion despite the freezing temperature. Breaking trail through deep snow was exhausting work, and they had been rotating the lead position every 30 minutes. "Any luck with the radio?" Morrison asked Thompson. Thompson shook his head, adjusting the antenna for the 100th time. "Nothing but static. The storm is blocking everything." That was when Williams made a disturbing discovery. "We're burning through our water supply faster than expected," he reported. "The dry air and physical exertion are causing dehydration." It was another problem they hadn't fully anticipated. In the extreme cold, they were sweating inside their protective gear, but the sweat was immediately wicked away by the dry air. They needed to drink more water to stay hydrated, but melting snow was consuming precious fuel. "We push on," Morrison decided. "We'll worry about water when we find shelter." By midday, they had covered less than 5 miles. The snow continued to fall, covering their tracks almost as quickly as they made them. Worse yet, Chen noticed that they were beginning to walk in circles. Without clear landmarks, they were relying entirely on their compass, but even that seemed unreliable. "Hold up," Rodriguez called from the front. He had stopped and was studying something in the snow ahead of them. The team gathered around him. In the snow were tracks, boot prints that were definitely not theirs. They were larger than military-issue boots, and the tread pattern was different. Someone else was out here in this frozen wasteland. "How old do you think they are?" Morrison asked. Williams knelt down and examined the tracks more closely. "Hard to say with all this snow, but they can't be more than a few hours old. Maybe less." The discovery changed everything. They were no longer alone in the wilderness. Someone else was moving through the storm. Someone who might be enemy forces, or possibly even the scientist they were supposed to extract. Morrison made a tactical decision. "We follow the tracks. Whoever made them might know where they're going." The boot prints led them in a slightly different direction than they had been traveling, angling more to the east. Following the tracks was easier than breaking new trail, but it also meant they were no longer in control of their route. After another hour of following the mysterious trail, Chen began to feel uneasy. The tracks seemed to be leading them in a large circle. Whoever had made them was either lost or deliberately trying to confuse anyone who might follow. "This doesn't feel right," he said during their next rest stop. Before Morrison could respond, Thompson's radio suddenly crackled to life. For a brief moment, they heard a voice through the static, speaking in Russian. The transmission lasted only a few seconds before dissolving back into white noise. But it was enough to confirm their worst fears. There were Russian forces in the area, probably searching for the same facility they were trying to reach. Could be routine patrol, Rodriguez suggested hopefully. In this weather? Williams shook his head. No one sends routine patrols into a Siberian blizzard. They're here for the same reason we are. Morrison felt the mission parameters shifting around him. What had started as a simple extraction was now becoming something much more complicated. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and operating in hostile territory during one of the worst storms in recent memory. We stick to the plan, he decided. Find the facility, secure the scientist and the data, get to extraction. If we run into hostiles, we deal with that when it happens. But as they prepared to move out again, Thompson detected another radio transmission. This time it was clearer, and all 5 men heard it distinctly. A woman's voice speaking in accented English. American team, do not follow the tracks. Danger ahead. The message was repeated twice before fading back into static. The team exchanged glances, each man wondering the same thing. Who was the woman, and how did she know they were American? Morrison tried to respond on the same frequency, but got no answer. Whoever had sent the warning was apparently not interested in a conversation. Could be a trap, Chen suggested. Could be, Morrison agreed. But why warn us if they wanted to ambush us? They were facing an impossible decision. Continue following the tracks and potentially walk into an ambush or strike out on their own again and risk getting lost in the storm. Either choice could be fatal. Williams pointed out another problem. We're down to half rations. If we don't find shelter or the facility soon, we won't have enough energy to reach the extraction point. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. They were lost, running low on supplies, potentially being tracked by enemy forces and receiving mysterious warnings from unknown sources. To make matters worse, the storm showed no signs of abating. Morrison made the hardest decision of his military career. We ignore the tracks and the warning. We trust our training and our equipment. We head northeast toward the facility coordinates, and we don't stop until we find it or reach the extraction point. As they prepared to leave the track and strike out across unmarked snow again, Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Somewhere in the swirling white chaos around them, eyes were following their every movement. The boot tracks they abandoned continued off into the distance, disappearing into the storm like a ghost trail. Behind them, their own tracks were already being filled by fresh snowfall. In an hour, there would be no sign they had ever passed this way. They were truly alone now in the Siberian wilderness, with only their training, their weapons, and their determination to keep them alive. But as they trudged through the deepening snow, each man wondered if it would be enough. The wind picked up again, driving snow into their faces like frozen needles. Visibility dropped to almost zero. They were walking blind into one of the most hostile environments on Earth, following nothing but a compass bearing and their own stubborn refusal to give up. Behind them, the mysterious tracks disappeared into the storm, along with any clue about who had made them or why they had received that cryptic warning. All they could do now was push forward and hope they were making the right choice. By evening of their 4th day, the Navy SEALs had reached their breaking point. They had been walking for nearly 12 hours straight, taking only brief rests to prevent their body temperature from dropping too dangerously. Rodriguez had developed the beginning stages of frostbite on his left hand, and Thompson was showing signs of exhaustion that worried Williams. The storm had intensified again as darkness approached. What little visibility they had possessed during the day was now completely gone. They were navigating by feel and instinct, stumbling through snowdrifts that sometimes reached their chests. "We need shelter," Williams shouted over the wind. Rodriguez needs medical attention, and we're all hypothermic. Morrison knew the medic was right, but there was nothing around them except endless white wasteland. They had seen no signs of civilization, no structures, nothing that could provide protection from the killing cold. That was when Chen spotted something in the distance. "Light," he called out, pointing through the swirling snow. At first, none of them could see anything, but then, like a beacon in the storm, a faint yellow glow appeared and disappeared through the blizzard. It was artificial light, which meant shelter, warmth, and possibly salvation. "Could be the facility," Morrison said hopefully. "Could be the Russians," Rodriguez countered, flexing his injured hand to keep the circulation going. They had no choice but to investigate. Moving as quietly as possible through the crunching snow, they approached the light source. What they found was not the research facility they were looking for, but rather a small building that appeared to be some kind of weather station or observation post. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows and smoke rose from a chimney. Someone was definitely inside, and they had heat. After 4 days in the brutal cold, the sight of that smoke was more beautiful than anything they had ever seen. Morrison signaled for the team to spread out and approach from different angles. They couldn't assume whoever was inside would be friendly. Their weapons were ready, though their frozen fingers could barely feel the triggers. As they moved into position, Thompson's radio suddenly crackled to life again. The same woman's voice they had heard earlier spoke clearly through the static. "American soldiers, you are safe to approach. Lower your weapons." The transmission was coming from inside the building. Whoever was speaking could apparently see them, despite the storm and darkness. Morrison felt exposed and vulnerable as he realized they had walked into a situation completely outside their control. "How do we know this isn't an ambush?" Chen whispered into his radio. Before anyone could answer, the front door of the building opened. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the warm light inside. As their eyes adjusted, the SEALs could see it was indeed a woman, tall and lean, wearing military-style winter gear. But what caught their attention immediately was the weapon she carried. It was a high-powered sniper rifle, held with the casual confidence of someone who knew how to use it. The rifle was not pointed at them, but rather cradled in her arms in a non-threatening position. "You may approach," she called out in accented English. "You are dying of cold." Morrison made the tactical decision that would later save all their lives. "Hold positions, but lower weapons. I'm going in alone first." As he walked toward the building, the woman stepped aside to allow him entry. The moment he crossed the threshold, the warmth hit him like a physical embrace. Inside, the building was comfortable and well-equipped. A fire burned in a stone fireplace, and military-grade communication equipment lined one wall. "My name is Katarina Volkov," the woman said, setting her rifle against the wall but keeping it within easy reach. "I am former Russian military intelligence. I have been waiting for you." Morrison studied her carefully. She appeared to be in her 30s, with short blonde hair and intelligent blue eyes. Her movements were precise and economical, suggesting extensive military training. But most importantly, she didn't seem hostile. "Waiting for us specifically?" Morrison asked. "Waiting for whoever Washington would send," she replied. "I am the one who stole the research data. I am your extraction target." The revelation hit Morrison like a thunderbolt. Dr. Katarina Volkov wasn't just some rogue scientist hiding in Siberia. She was their mission objective, and she had been expecting them. "Signal the others to come in," she said, moving to add wood to the fire. "Your men are suffering from hypothermia. Without treatment, at least one of them will not survive the night." Morrison called his team in, and one by one they stumbled through the door into blessed warmth. Rodriguez collapsed into a chair near the fire, while Williams immediately began treating the frostbite damage to his hand. "How long have you been here?" Thompson asked, still not entirely trusting their situation. 6 months, Katarina replied, preparing hot drinks for each of them. When I discovered what my government intended to do with my research, I knew I had to act. I have been monitoring radio frequencies, waiting for an American extraction team. As the SEALs warmed up and received medical attention, Katerina explained the situation. The research facility they had been looking for was indeed nearby, but it was now occupied by a full company of Russian soldiers. Her former colleagues were desperate to recapture her and the stolen data. "The information I possess could shift the balance of nuclear power for the next 50 years, she said seriously. "My government will do anything to prevent it from reaching American hands." Chen studied the communication equipment lining the walls. "This is how you've been tracking radio transmissions. You knew we were coming before we even landed." Katerina nodded. "I also knew that Russian forces were converging on this area. You walked into a trap, but the storm has been your protection. The enemy cannot move in this weather any more than you can." Williams looked up from treating Rodriguez's frostbite. "What about extraction?" "Our helicopter is supposed to pick us up in 2 days." "Impossible," Katerina said flatly. "Russian forces control the extraction zone. Your pilot would be shot down before he could land." Morrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him again. Their mission had just become infinitely more complicated. Not only did they need to survive in hostile territory, they needed to evade a full company of enemy soldiers while escorting a high-value target through a Siberian blizzard. "What do you suggest?" he asked. Katerina moved to a wall map covered with marked positions. "There is an alternative extraction point here," she pointed to a location about 20 miles away. "It is an old airstrip, abandoned but still usable. If you can get word to your people, they might be able to reach us there." "That's a long way to travel in this weather," Chen observed. "The storm is beginning to weaken," Katerina replied. "In 12 hours, we should be able to move, but we must leave before the Russians can organize their search." As if summoned by her words, Thompson's radio suddenly burst to life with Russian voices. Multiple units were reporting their positions, coordinating search patterns. The enemy was out there in the storm, looking for them. "They know you're in this area," Katerina translated. "They're setting up checkpoints on all the major routes." Morrison gathered his team for a quick conference. Their situation had improved dramatically. They had shelter, warmth, and their extraction target. But they were also surrounded by enemy forces in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. "We can do this," he told his men. "We've faced worse odds before." "Not in Siberia, we haven't," Rodriguez said, flexing his treated hand. Williams had been studying Katerina's map. "This route here looks possible. It avoids the main search areas and uses natural terrain for cover." "That route crosses 3 frozen rivers and goes through wolf territory," Katerina warned, "but it is our best chance." As they planned their escape route, the storm continued to rage outside. But for the first time in days, the SEALs felt something they had almost forgotten: hope. They had found their target. They had shelter and warmth. And they had a plan. Thompson managed to establish brief contact with their command base, confirming the alternative extraction point. The response was immediate. A rescue helicopter would attempt to reach them in 36 hours, weather permitting. 36 hours, Morrison mused. "We can do that." Katerina checked her rifle one more time before setting it aside. "Tomorrow, when the storm breaks, we begin our journey. Until then, we rest and prepare." As the team settled in for the night, taking turns on watch while the others slept by the fire, Chen couldn't help but think about how close they had come to disaster. If they hadn't found this shelter, if Katerina hadn't been waiting for them, they would have died in the storm. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside the small building, 5 exhausted Navy SEALs and 1 Russian defector planned their escape from the frozen wasteland of Siberia. The most dangerous part of their mission was still ahead of them, but for the first time since landing in this frozen hell, they had a real chance of making it home alive.